Dear Excellencies, dear distinguished guests, dear students, we are very pleased to welcome you to our new format, the ETIA Talks. My name is Jäger, and together with my colleague Rosa Tierczek, we are both the board of the Environmental Society.
The ETIA Talks series aims to shed light on current issues and topics in the realm of climate, the environment and renewable energies, and aims to engage with leading figures in science, diplomacy and the civil society. Tonight, for our very first event, our distinguished panel here will explore the topic that perfectly illustrates just how deeply interconnected the environment, diplomacy, and basically everything else in our world really is. The COP30, its outcomes, and what we can expect from future climate policy. We'd like to thank the Diplomatic Academy of Vienna, the TU Wien, for helping us make this event possible tonight. And without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Professor Hestermeyer, who will guide us through the panel discussion tonight.
Before we start, and because this is the first ETIA talk, I wanted to say at least some words also about the program. ETIA is a very demanding 2-year Master of Science program that we offer together with TU Wien. It is demanding because it is incredibly interdisciplinary. The first year, students spend at the Diplomatische Akademie, and they do things like international law, EU law, environmental law, economics, international economics, cultural studies, political science. The second year, they spend at the TU and they do chemistry, physics, mathematics, nuclear safety, air, water, resources, waste management, and the like. So ETIA students we hope that those students are particularly well prepared to tackle the problems of sustainability that we have. And this already brings us to our talk. Where are we in terms of sustainability? Incidental reports are more than depressing. If you look at Tuvalu changed its constitution to continue to exist even if it does not have territory. The city of Tehran apparently will have to move because it does not have water. That is 15 million people. And if you move beyond incidental reporting and go to more systemic reports, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, in its 6th synthesis report in 2023, wrote, continued greenhouse gas emissions will lead to increasing global warming with a best estimate of reaching 1.5 degrees in the near term. Every increment of global warming will multiply concurrent hazards. UNEP reported in November of this year that we have failed to limit the rise in global temperatures to 1.5 degrees, so we can only limit it to somewhere above that. The International Court of Justice, in its climate change opinion of this year also, acknowledged the question of how to tackle climate change is more than a legal problem and concerns an existential problem of planetary proportions that imperils all forms of life and the very health of our planet. International law has an important but ultimately limited role in resolving this problem. A complete solution to this daunting and self-inflicted problem requires the contribution of all fields of human knowledge, whether law, science, economics, or any other. And as a lawyer myself, you know how dire the situation is if lawyers say law is not the solution. In this spirit, we have assembled what I would refer to as a star-studded panel to review the outcome of COP30. COP, as you all know, is the Conference of Parties of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, which held its 30th meeting this year in Belém in Brazil. That the meeting was held in Brazil gives me hope for 3 reasons. The Amazon is core to the protection of our climate, and President Lula's Tropical Forest Forever facility gives us hope that maybe our tropical forest will continue to exist. The second reason is that Brazil's Minister of Environment and Climate Change, Marina Silva, is an extraordinarily knowledgeable person in the area. And the third cause for optimism is that Brazil's Foreign Service has a global reputation for competence also amongst foreign services. And in that spirit, I'm proud to welcome 3 extraordinary speakers today. I'll start with Cornelia Jäger, who headed the Austrian delegation at COP30 and works for the Austrian Federal Ministry. It's quite a mouthful, Federal Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry, Climate and Environmental Protection, Regions and Water Management. I hope I got that right. Our second speaker is Professor Dr. Helga Kromp-Kolb, a Professor Emeritus of BOKU University and co-founder of the Climate Change Center, Austria. And last but not least, His Excellency Eduardo Paes Saboia, Ambassador of the Federative Republic of Brazil to Austria and permanent representative of Brazil to the UN, with the exception of the IAEA, as I just learned, in Vienna. Signor Ambassador, è un placer receberlo nella Accademia Diplomática in Viena. Agradecemos por ter aceitado nosso convite. That is, otherwise I'll resort to Spanish. So we'll start with opening statements for 5 minutes, and then we'll have a moderated debate. Thank you all very, very much for coming. This will also be live streamed, so we use the microphones.
Thank you for this invitation. This is a very prestigious institution. I had one of my bosses was attended the Diplomatic Academy, and he had a quite successful career. And we're celebrating this year 80 years of the Brazilian Diplomatic Academy, which happens to be the third oldest one. Of course, yours is by far the most traditional one. Then you have the École Nationale d'Administration, and the third one is the Brazilian. So I'm going to disappoint you, because unlike you, I wasn't in Berlin. I was in Vienna during COP30, and I'm not from Berlin. My Larissa from the Brazilian Embassy is from Berlin. So if you want to know things about Berlin, you can talk to her. But of course, like all of us who are interested in international affairs, we and Brazilians in particular, we followed very closely this major international event, which took place at a very venue that is very significant, symbolic, and also at a time that is very difficult. So, and all the complexities from the logistic, from the geopolitical, I think the fact that it actually took place is already a feat. I mean, and I think that, and for Brazil, starting point, I would say that environmental issues are key. The fact that we are home to the largest rainforest with biodiversity, and not just that, we have also other biomes that are rich in biodiversity and which are important. And this, of course, puts a lot of responsibility on our shoulders, and that's why we hosted Rio 92. I also was not present. All my colleagues were present, but I was sent on a mission, so there's something, maybe they have something against me, I don't know. But then we had also Rio +20 in Brazil, and so when President Lula took office, he wanted to demonstrate Brazil's commitment to combating climate change and to environmental issues. So he thought, why not host this conference in a place where it is part of the discussion, part of the solution, and also give voice to those who live, in a way, in this very important ecosystem. As a Brazilian, I think that, and a country that, I don't know about our diplomacy, but we have a commitment to finding solutions, collective solutions, just like Austria, by the way. I think diplomacy is in your DNA here. And so we're very we are optimistic that this COP30 will also resonate not just in the field of an important issue of climate change and environment, but also on the broader international issues related to multilateralism and to peaceful solutions to conflicts. Those are my initial remarks. I don't know how you...
Thank you. Ms. Jäger, what is the view from the Austrian perspective of Belém and what happened?
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yeah, I think it works. Thank you very much, first of all, for the invitation. And I was actually quite surprised about this 2-year program you're having. Well, I can identify quite a lot with the first year, but the second year is so out of my league when it comes to mathematics, physics, and nuclear, whatever it was. So congrats to everyone who is actually part of this program. On Belém, and I do apologize to all the Brazilian colleagues in here because for a non-native speaker, the pronunciation of the city is almost impossible. So to say Belém, somehow, okay, good, not so bad.
It's easier than Österreich.
Okay.
For Brazilians.
I did practice for quite a bit, so. What to say about the COP in Brazil? It has been a very interesting COP, a very challenging COP, and as the ambassador just highlighted, it has been hosted in an area which one would not think that you could host a conference this size. In a place where actually there is no experience or almost no experience with kind of accommodating that many people. So it began with a lot of challenges, all the ups and downs when it came to accommodation. But I'm sure everyone has read the news, so I don't need to expand on that one. But anyhow, it was interesting to see that apart from all the troubles at the very beginning, that all the countries had the will to come to Belém and to meet and to talk. And we know that we are living in a world of geopolitical troubles, of budgetary issues, environmental issues, you can name them. So everyone came, sat down, and talked. However, one also have to say that the political will to talk alone is not going to help the planet, is not going to kind of have transformation or help transformation. And I thought for this opening remarks, I'm sure everyone read on the news it was a big failure, the COP didn't deliver. So I thought maybe start with some positive news about what happened at the conference. It wasn't an easy exercise being part of the negotiating team there, but I thought I make an effort. First of all, what I just said, given the geopolitical tensions, everyone came. I think it was a big success that parties came to Belém, sat down, and had a talk. The second issue I would like to mention is we had more than 120 countries submitting an NDC, which is the nationally determined contribution. Even the EU managed to do so. It was last minute, I would say, but we did our homework. We managed to submit something. And those more than 120 countries kind of cover more than 70% of global emissions. Is it enough? No, of course not. But it is a good contribution, yes. I would say. And when you look at this Mutirao decision, another word which is difficult to pronounce, that's the famous decision coming out of Belém. There is still a commitment to kind of keep the 1.5 target within reach. It is a difficult exercise, but at least there is still a commitment there to kind of do something. There's the first time that parties agreed that there is a possibility to overshoot and that we need to kind of, when it comes to overshoot, that we limit the period where this actually can happen. I mean, it's not sure whether this is a positive or a negative signal, but at least there is this kind of awareness that something like that can happen. There is a commitment. I mean, you need to kind of be in the process and know the texts. While the word fossil fuels or fossil doesn't show up in the text itself, if you know that with the UAE consensus, there is a reference to the global stocktake, and the global stocktake actually refers to fossil fuels and deforestation, so it's a little bit like we would say, like this to get the whole concept of phasing out or transitioning away of fossil fuels into the text. It is actually there, but one need to be a little bit of a nerd to kind of know that. So there are positive things, and maybe I don't want to kind of overpass my time limit. It's also when you look at media, usually it's only the political issues pop up. So it's usually a focus on fossil. Is the fossil fuel phase out or transitioning away? Is it there or is it not? What about climate finance? And then it gets a little bit very thin on the discussions, because anything else is very technical, is very nerdy, and it's difficult for the politicians and journalists to grasp, and no one talks about those issues anymore. So it's always a little bit of a personal mission to explain to people it's actually 5 bodies meeting. You have 5 bodies with 5 agendas. So what we are doing is negotiating for 2 weeks more than 50 agenda items. So the only thing which pops up in media is one single agenda item, and you don't hear anything of the rest. If I can maybe just name a couple of you, we have, for example, for climate finance, there are 5 funds in the process. Every fund needs guidance. What is the fund going to do the next years? Every single year we have to negotiate the guidance of these funds. Or, for example, for reporting or monitoring, you need to give guidance to countries what to report on, what to monitor. And those are things which are so super technical, but they need to happen, but they never show up in public, or you can't hear them in public, or a politician is not going to talk about MRV or NCQG or MPG. I mean, it's all those different acronyms. So I think there is quite some good things which have happened, quite some not so good things or positive things which have happened. But yeah, I think for the moment, I'll leave it like that.
Thank you very much, which brings us to the outside view of the academic observer. You've observed the climate debate for a long time. What are the important outcomes for you, and what are the important failures for you?
Well, first, thank you for having me here. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. These earphones are not made for people with hearing aids, therefore I have to use this. Okay. I think the first thing I want to say is we have said for many years the science is clear. It turns out it's not as clear as we thought. It's worse than we thought. The reality is worse than we thought. Climate change is happening faster than we expected. And on the other hand, political process is slower than we had hoped for. So this is, I think, the background that we need to understand. What I think has really evolved in the course of the COPs, and especially at this one, but maybe correct me because I was not there and I'm not negotiator, so I can just look from the outside. My impression is, and I think that's partly due also to the Brazilian leadership, that there is more understanding that solving the climate issue is more than just reducing carbon dioxide emissions. It is embedded in a whole system of changes that needs to be made, because otherwise we will never succeed in reducing the carbon dioxide emissions. And by the way, the climate issue is embedded in a whole lot of other issues, and we've just picked that one out. I'm a climate scientist, so I tend to overemphasize climate, possibly, if at all. But I think we need to be aware that many of the crises we are living through at the moment that are evolving are interconnected, are very strongly interconnected. And we have this conference of the parties for the UNFCCC, which focuses on climate. But I think it is becoming more clear, and I think that was one of the things that I gathered from looking at the reports. There is more understanding that it is not sufficient to just look at whatever technological or other solutions we have of reducing carbon dioxide. It's more involved than that. That is one thing. Another thing that I think has become clear, but again, I'm willing to be corrected, is that we need to make changes to the procedure. That the consensus principle is just not fast enough at the stage we're at now. I think it's important that everybody meets. I think it's important that everybody talks. But in reality, there's all sorts of agreements that are happening not in the plenum, but aside from the plenum, and many of the positive things happen there. And I think that's valuable. And if there's some 80 or so countries that said they want to phase out fossil, at least oil and coal, I'm not quite sure what they want to phase out, but at least these two, I think that's fine, let them do it. That will mean that those countries that want to export the fossil fuels will have less option to do so. So I think there's a lot happening. And by the way, I'm not quite sure of how to address this, but at least from what I gathered, China has not been very vocal during the meeting, but has been very diligent in making deals of exporting renewable energy and electric cars. And that's practical climate change, politics. So, yeah, you might say they're doing it for economic reasons, but the result is we have more renewables. So, I think there's a lot of, and one of the things which probably others can explain better, but one of the indicators that we need more than just reducing carbon dioxide is, I think, the Just Transition Fund, which is not just a fund, it's a mechanism. And a mechanism was agreed upon, and Just Transition is more than just reducing, decarbonizing. And so I think there's a lot of positive aspects. Of course, I would have loved to have Paris 2 or something like that, with everybody joyfully saying, now we've saved the world. Well, it didn't happen, but I think there's a lot of progress there. Nevertheless, as I said before, climate isn't waiting for us to get our act together, and we really have to speed up. And I think that is where the disappointment comes in. I would say it's small steps forward, necessary steps forward, but it's not the big leap, the giant leap that, for instance, the Club of Rome in its Earth for All program asks for. We're not doing that yet.
Thank you. And I think I want to come back to the consensus point towards the end, because I think that's really important. But I wanted to pick up another point, the funds. Because when we hear about the outcomes, we hear about all of the failures. CBAM was not addressed, deforestation was not sufficiently addressed, but all pushed down the road. Carbon transition was not addressed, but there was the Muchirao, and there was first of all a statement that this is an implementation COP, and second, there was a lot about equitable climate finance. So could you, and I'll put this to you, to summarize what was decided on implementation and on equitable finance? And I do know, I bear in mind what you said about the technicality of it. Is there a way to break it down to make us understand it?
I'll try my best. But maybe let me get back a couple of months before I answer your questions. It's every presidency, COP presidency, every COP has certain mandates because they are given. You have to deal with them. So the COP in Brazil didn't have what I usually say the big bang mandate. So like, for example, you agree like last year on a new climate finance goal, or in Dubai we had the global stocktake. So there was not this big bang moment. So from the very beginning, the Brazilians said they want to have the implementation COP. At the point, some parties said it's an adaptation COP. it was never a finance COP. So we had either the implementation COP or the adaptation COP. And when we talk adaptation COP, it was not about adaptation finance. It was, and I'm sorry, I now get nerdy again, it's about indicators to measure progress on adaptation. So when coming to Brazil, on the adaptation, let's call it adaptation COP part, there was a text agreed on adaptation indicators. Whether it is a good one or not a good one, the COP almost failed over the text, so there was a major uproar in the last couple of hours, so we will see how this is going to work out. Yes, it was adaptation finance involved. As you might have heard, there was an agreement on tripling adaptation finance. You can call it a success. We still don't know what's the basis of the tripling. Is there a basis year? It's not mentioned in the decision. Is there a number or a figure? It's not mentioned in the decision. So you can be sure the next couple of years we are going to, I say it diplomatically, discuss what the tripling means. Coming to implementation, if you ask me, I would say no. The COP has not delivered on the implementation part for the reasons Ms. Kromp-Kolb said, also for the reasons Austria is part of an EU member state, and the priority for the EU is success on mitigation. We need to just work on ambition, and it has not been delivered. There was no step. I actually can quote the Austrian press now, because in Austrian press it was said the COP was no step backwards, no step forwards, but a step to the side. It's movement, but not sure it's the right direction to me. So, I mean, it has not delivered on that part. So, and on finance, as I said in the beginning, we had a big conference last year where parties agreed on a new finance goal. So until this year, we have the global goal to reach 100 billion per year, which developed countries need to deliver to developing countries, so the global north to the global south. It's easier to understand. And as of next year, this goal of the 100 billion has increased to 300 billion. So by the year 2035, the global north needs to deliver 300 billion per year to the global south. Coming to this year, there was no mandate to have another finance goal or anything on finance at the COP. So anyhow, it delivered on an adaptation finance goal. Whether this is enough to have an agreement or what you kind of asked on to kind of deliver on equitable finance, I don't know, but there was a decision.
There's a quick and very cynical question back that I have to ask. The goal was 100 billion. How much of that is actually delivered?
We delivered in 2022 the first time on the 100 billion. You can't actually say for now 2024. It takes time until every country reports on the figures and the numbers. So I know for 2022 it has been delivered. 2023 level and numbers are not there yet. So it will take a little bit of time.
What is the view from Brazil in terms of the financing goals in particular? Because Lula also announced a new financing tool, the Forest Forever Fund.
Well, I think that frustration on the finance side is not new. I mean, it's been there for a decade, so it's not a surprise. I also think that it's not just about just repeating the same mantra of we need more finance, but it's about thinking how can we make it more attractive and more intelligent. So I think the Tropical Forest Forever facility is an idea, and it draws also from the Amazon Fund, so performance-based. So I think we'll see how that works, but I think it's a step forward. I remember years ago, it was very difficult to talk about forests. There was a lot of, sensitivity to this idea. So now I think it's something that will attract. Adaptation, the figures have to increase because as you mentioned, the science has shown that it's even worse than we expected. So if we don't have adaptation sufficient, it will be how do you say, when you terminal patient, you just give them medication to the pain relief, because the prospect would be. So I think the call to implementation and the mobilization of people should not be minimized. I think it's very important when you communicate to people, to community, when you engage them in and say that there has to be a multi-round. It's not going to be the governments, it's not going to be the private, it's going to be everyone, including the local community. I think this is a message that right now it may sound, if you read the fine print of what was agreed, but this is not enough. But in the end, it's about the minds, because the people who will tell their governments, who will make their decisions as consumers, are those who are in charge, actually, because then they will mobilize the governments, and the governments will have to, in a way, respond to that call. So I think and I fully agree with the idea that, I think that's fundamental, that it's not about reducing CO2, no? By the way, I should not drink this water. It's about changing also lifestyles and having a whole array of changes. So I think from an outsider point of view, not having been in Belém, I think it was a half glass full of hopefully not carbonated water, but at a time that is, we cannot underestimate the difficult time that we live in. The things that we as diplomats have to listen to in meetings are something unheard of. It's like we retroceded in many. I started at the Foreign Service in the early 90s, and we had the democratic constitution. We had the fall of the Berlin Wall. We had the Rio Conference. We thought that it was up. There was a lot of optimism. Of course, the world continued to have lots of problems, including in the neighborhood here. But and now it's like, I don't know. I'm shocked. But I think the COP30 is a response, in a way. It's to this. To what we see in different parts of the world.
So I want to continue the two themes of implementation and climate finance. And I also pick up the point of the ambassador, how can we make this attractive? Because the debate on finance is always us against you, I pay more. It's more like bargaining in a bazaar with a lot of shaming. What ideas are there to make this attractive to both sides? And how do you see the progress achieved in Belém, both on financing and on implementation?
Well, I think that we have so far not been able to make the public understand that climate policy can be a policy towards a better quality of life for all of us. Also industrialized nations. Also for us, it could be a path towards a better quality of life, higher quality, maybe not a higher living standard, but a higher quality of life, and that's something different. And in the end, that's what really counts. There's this long-term study by the Harvard Medical School. They interviewed sophomores, 70 years ago, at the time it was only men, asking them what you expect of your life, what will make your life successful. And these young men all came up with the same: they want to be rich, they want to be important, they want to be admired. That is what all our our media tell us that we need to want. But they followed these same people through their life. And it's 70 years ago, and they did that for every single year. And when you ask the people at 50, 60, mainly 60 years or so, was your life successful? Then those people who are really satisfied with their life are not those that have become important, rich, and president of the United States. It's those that have a family, a network of friends, that have time for their hobbies, that can determine how they spend their time. That's what makes a happy life and a successful life. And I think we have to get this across, that we are chasing after the wrong things. And in chasing after the wrong things, we're ruining the planet. So in the end, we will never reach those things that we are chasing after, because we're ruining the planet faster than we can achieve them. And I think that is something that has not yet been understood. And it's not on the agenda of the media, it's not on the agenda of the universities, it's not on the agenda of politicians, but that is the message we really need to get across. And if we do that, if people can understand that it's their own life that we're talking about and the quality of their life, then I think many things will become attractive. If you look at what people, I just happened to have an experience a few days ago within my wider family. Somebody broke into their garage and stole all sorts of things, and e-bikes and skiing gear and all sorts of things. But what he cried about was the Christmas decorations that she inherited from her mother. Mm-hmm. That's what she cried about, not about the other things. So what is really important to us is not what we're constantly being told is important. And I think we need this change of mindset. And I think that is where Eastern, but also South American philosophy, way of thinking, way of life could really help us. We sort of have the impression that we have to go out and tell the rest of the world what they need to do. I think it's the other way around. I think we should start listening. And I think that was one of the positive things at the COP30, that they really allowed the local people to also voice what they think is important.
So that brings me to a follow-up through a...
It didn't really answer your question.
No, but I think it provided a segue to the next one, which is very helpful. Namely, I read recently about 15-minute cities. You will know the idea of a 15-minute city, the idea that you can reach everything within 15 minutes, which I think most people in the room think, this would be cool. I could walk to work, I can walk to the doctor, I can walk to the shop. I don't have to drive for 1.5 hours to get everything. But somehow, in the US, this turned into a conspiracy theory, and people said, oh, this is about people wanting to prohibit, and it wasn't quite clear to me ever what they wanted to prohibit. But that brings us to the moment that we're living in. The US did not engage, and it's not that it didn't engage, it is that the US government does not believe in human-made climate change. What do you say to those who say, this is all pointless if a country that pollutes as much as the US does not participate? And even worse, a lot of people fly to Belém when nothing recognizably happens. Isn't this all counterproductive? We should stop having these COPs.
Well, I don't think the US wasn't represented. I think there was a lot of NGOs, both sides, fossil as well as environmental NGOs there. There was a lot of business there. There was the governor of California there. And even though the federal government in the US doesn't believe in climate change, although personally I doubt that they don't believe in it, I don't see how anybody cannot believe in it. I just think that they see that the measures that need to be taken are so contrary to their ideological belief that they just cannot accept, they just cannot admit that there's climate change. So I think there's a lot happening in the US in spite of the present government. And I think that's important to know and to recognize. I mean, we have the opposite. We have a minister who went to COP30. He gave a speech there that I don't know who wrote it. It could have been me from the content. Yeah, and then he comes back and he does the opposite. I mean, the US say we don't believe in climate change, we're not doing anything, and they're doing harm. No doubt about that. They're harming the development, but they're not stopping it. And we have a government that says climate change is ultra important, and the whole world needs to rally behind this 1.5 degrees goal. And we do the opposite. We don't do it when we deregulate everything that was meant to work towards. So I don't know what's worse. Saying you don't want to do it, but the public doing, or saying you want to do it and not doing anything, I'm not quite sure. I mean, Austria is not as important as the US, no doubt, but from the basic principle. I think the COPs, climate COPs, are one of the occasions where really practically the whole world meets. There's not so many occasions. And there's so many places where countries are at war in some way or other, real war or economic war, where they're so opposite sides that I think it's really important that they meet. I don't think it's important for me to be there. There's enough scientists there, there's enough politicians, diplomats there. I don't think everybody has to go there. But I think the meeting as such is important. But if we continue with this discussing issues which the general public doesn't understand and not showing real forward movement, then I think it will become questionable, and then all these side aspects will become more and more dominant in the public discourse. I mean, we talked in Europe, especially in German speaking, we talked a lot about what Mr. Merz said at the end when he came back. We talked about a fire in one of the pavilions. We talked about roads being built, and we talked about all sorts of things, but not about the important things. I think we need to find a form where the important issues are also made visible and understandable to the public.
I almost feel like I have to apologize for Mr. Merz. But let's give a twist to this question, because for diplomats and for people engaged in negotiation, the absence of the US and, in fact, the hostility of the US to that project, what does that mean for both for the practical work and then afterwards for the host country? How do you adapt? Do you have to adapt? Can we just move forward ignoring the US and doing our thing, or is the US too important and too much of a subscriber to our global order to pretend it just does not exist?
Well, a good question, difficult answer. Maybe let's start with some fun facts from the COP, because all of the former colleagues from the US government, they were there. So all had observer badges, NGO badges. So it was so nice, first of all, to see them, because they are nice people. We have been negotiating with them for years, so they are actually friends. So it was really nice to see them. But the US didn't sit at the table. They didn't say anything. Was this good or bad? I think with the current position they are having, and what you just highlighted, it might have been actually good that they weren't there, because they would have had the position of the blocking countries, of the least progressive, the least ambitious countries. So not sure whether this kind of would have helped the process. On the other side, oh yes, they left a huge gap. They actually left a massive gap, because the US is a powerful country. They are one of the big emitters. They are one of the big finance contributors. They left, as I said, a massive gap. And it's also not only because it's the US, but it's also their relationship, if I can call it, with China, for example. They talk to each other at eye level. So, and everyone knows either both are moving or none of them is moving. So now with China, it's a bit difficult because the US is not there anymore. So it's the whole process has become. I think it was a little bit of a guinea pig test right now in Penang, the first COP without the US. Everyone realized that it changed a lot without the US at the table, and I think even the EU, we will have to kind of sit down and rethink on how we approach the next conference with the US not being at the table, because we considered the US as an ally. They helped us with a lot of things. We had the same positions on a lot of things, and now there's no support anymore there. So, yeah.
Were they, if not at the table, in the brain? Meaning, when drafting texts, did people say, oh, look, this is the US position, either let's not cause too much of an uproar against them, or let's take their position into account because we want them to come back eventually, so we cannot just move on and ignore their interest?
I remember when the US left the Paris Agreement the first time, we actually had the orders in the EU, think as if the US would sit at the table because we want them back at in the rooms. So don't do anything where you know the US is not gonna agree to this. And I think this is still the mindset, because we want to have partners at the table. And it was a kind of a common saying all that in the negotiating rooms, that we hope that soon everyone, all our friends will be back at the table. So everyone is actually waiting for the US to come back. So I don't think that anyone willingly would do something which would harm the US or not facilitate the US to come back.
And for the host country, of course, this is a particularly difficult situation. And given Trump's history, his support of Bolsonaro, his attacks on the independence of Brazilian courts, and Brazil's, I think, in Europe, much admired strength in just saying, these are our courts do our law, and they don't do your law, and we stand on their side. What does that mean for the host? How can you adapt to the US not being there and make the COP a success, knowing that the world's last hegemon bears irrational grudges in the form of its president and does not believe in the project?
Well, I think it's not the first time in US history where you have the US not wanting to join a collective effort. I mean, there was some reluctance to engage in World War II in the beginning, no? There was a lot of effort from the UK but I think that, and as far as Brazil is concerned, we tried not only to emphasize the invitation. President Lula talked to President Trump, and they had, he said, insisted that he should come. But also we are open to, we should leave the door open, but we also have, the door also has to be open to the small island developing countries, there's no solution without hearing different situations and different voices. And I traveled 2 years ago twice to the Pacific Islands, because I was in charge of Asia, Pacific, and also Russia. And I thought, in the preparations for COP, we should reach out. And it really was very dramatic what you see there. But they also have very talented delegates, and so they're they're good at defending their cause. I want to raise an issue which I think is maybe is the root cause of some of what we're seeing now in different countries, and also the contradictions we also see in Brazil. It's not just in Austria. We had recently a legislation that was a veto from President Lula that was overruled by Congress, which is regrettable. But I think some parts of the population in different countries feel left out with globalization. That's not so. When you have higher energy prices, it affects them in a very strong manner, and I think this tends to create certain impatience, especially in certain sectors of society, with what it means actually to transition to a low carbon economy. It's not obvious that you will keep your job, but not just because of the green transition, also digital transformation is also affecting. So I think this uneasiness about is something that is related also to inequality. Inequality, not when you think about not just in developed countries, but also in developing countries. When you think about climate justice, no, it's not about developing countries versus developed countries. Of course there is, but my carbon footprint compared to another Brazilian who lives on the streets is totally different. So I cannot, sit in a meeting room and say no and talk, and then have the same lifestyle that I have. So we need to think about those things. So when we're talking about climate finance, you have to think, where does this money go? Does it go to Eduardo Saboia so he can maintain his lifestyle, or does it really? It's part of working towards a transformation in lifestyles. So inequality is really something that if we don't address that, we're going to have in political systems, we're going to have more and more people that will retrocede in terms of multilateral commitments, in terms of. So that's my take on this topic.
I agree very much, and this brings me back, and I'd like to add on something. States have again and again emphasized various goals because they were easy to agree. It is easy for states to sit down and to say, let's limit everything to 1.5 degrees. Mm-hmm. Wonderful, sounds like we're active, and I accordingly fully endorse the Brazilian approach of saying, let's make this about implementation, because the reality is, we've repeated the 1.5 degrees over and over. It was the easy part. But when it comes to how can we make this real, and we suggest that maybe people shouldn't fly every time they have a free weekend, we already get a lot of pushback. And the first thing they would say is, but industry. But of course the industry produces the things we buy, so everything does seem connected. So the question to the academic is, where can we start to get people on board with this changed mindset that would give us hope that we can actually implement the goals? The court, by the way, has done what it could. It said, you've always said 1.5 degrees, you know what? We'll interpret these agreements to say 1.5 degrees. Why? Because you've said it again and again. And if you now don't act, you're in breach of the law. But of course, that doesn't bring society along. So how can we? I know this is a huge question, and I'm very sorry, but I have to ask it to someone.
Well, if we had the answer, we'd be doing it. But I think part of the answer is also what you just said now. If you approach the problem with systems dynamics, systems thinking, looking at the issue, then you find that the real leverage point is inequality, is societal tension. If you can eliminate societal tension, then there's a lot more willingness for change, and we need willingness to change habits, change lifestyles, change all sorts of things. And if there's tension because you don't know whether you'll have a job, whether you don't know what kind of government you'll have, and so on, then you're not willing to do experiments. And we need experiments because nobody can tell exactly this is the path, and it won't fail. There will be no errors. It's a new situation, and we will make mistakes, and we need to be aware of that, and we need to accept that there will be mistakes, and we will just have to correct them. But this willingness to try things out depends on how safe you feel. If you don't feel safe, you don't let go of anything, because at least you have what you have. And I think that's one of the big problems, that we haven't been able to solve this yet, and we haven't really addressed it. It's only very recent that even science looks at the emissions of different income classes or wealth classes. Until, I would say, about 5 years ago, nobody discussed it. Nobody discussed that the top 10% of the wealthy people, or the 10% wealthy people emit about half the greenhouse gas emissions. So if we don't address their lifestyles and what they do, then we won't be able to reduce our emissions to the level we need to reduce them. Besides, they have a lot of political influence, and they spend their money in the way to increase their money, and that is not climate friendly. That used to be fossil fuels, now it's armaments, so all of this is not climate friendly. So we have to address this issue. And this is why I think it's also a matter of quality of life. A less unequal, unjust society is better for all participants, for the ones who are at the bottom of the scale, obviously, but also for the others. And there's plenty of evidence for that in science. May I just come back to one question I have, if I may ask a question as well. The US as leader nation sort of dropped out. The European Union was not especially ambitious in jumping in, considering what the decisions in Brussels are at present. Would that not be an opportunity for the other nations to organize themselves? If you have a vacuum of leadership, it is actually a possibility for others to coordinate, to build alliances, to bring forward their interests. Couldn't that be a hopeful development?
And you're asking me?
And maybe
Anybody
including
like
the
answer?
question, like, did that happen? Was there an alliance of other countries who stepped into the void and said, okay, we don't hear from the US, we know what happens in the EU, so we'll cut you some slack, and now we, Chile, Brazil, we'll step into the gap, we'll lead. Was that something that happened, or was everyone a bit shell-shocked about the reality of the world at the moment?
I start and...
Please. Please do, because I have to think about it.
I think... So I think I need to turn on my microphone, sorry for that. I think a lot of countries and groups, they were in shock what actually happened, because no one, but this is my very personal analysis right now, because no one thought that not having the US at the table would leave such a big gap. And I slightly don't agree with you that the EU didn't try. We tried, but we are not the biggest emitter anymore. We think that we are powerful at the table, but I think we learned a different lesson now. And I think this is why also what I said before, we need to go back and rethink how we want to be perceived, how others perceive us, and what we need to do to kind of, I don't want to go down the road and say to step in the footsteps of the US, which is an impossible thing to do, but at least to kind of try to fill them a little bit. Did other countries do that? Usually we are kind of the countries in the process are organized in groups. It's like, for example, it's not Austria talking, it's the EU talking. And you also have this for other developed countries, like the US, not anymore, but UK, Norway, Australia, New Zealand, they are part of the so-called umbrella group. They didn't step in at all. So it was the most vocal one was actually the UK, but also a little bit like, we don't know yet. So, but no one from the developed countryside actually stood up and tried. What I think happened is that the not ambitious side filled the void because they got much more power. They aligned, all of them almost aligned on the blocking side of not progressing, of staying where we are. actually stepping back or down from Paris, kind of going back to the convention, to where we were in 1992 when we agreed on the whole climate framework. So I think this group of countries actually, they kind of stepped in, which is not a good thing if you come from an ambitious, progressive country. Happy to hand over.
Well, from my point of view, being here in Austria, not having been in Berlin, which by the way is a very beautiful city with a lot of, they have a traditional feast, Siru, that mobilize thousands of people. No? But anyway, from what I see here in Europe and in Austria, I think that Brazil is trying to mobilize countries in different platforms. We have the G20, we have the UN, we have COP, we have South America, we have Mercosur, and we have important relations with the big BRICS countries, you know, like China, India, Russia. But sometimes, and we also have, for instance, Mercosur EU. And that's one of the topics that I'm a bit perplexed being here in Austria, because we've been negotiating an agreement that has it's not only about trade, it's about also two regions that see themselves as, you know, we cannot do it alone. We're going to do it together with neighboring countries, and we'll have democratic laws, and will be integration. And with the EU, it would be natural and logic that we signed this agreement. And unfortunately, Austria is not very forthcoming. At least, I think this is changing a bit, but still hesitant. I remember this negotiations because I attended one of the first negotiations, and I always say this story, but I was a bit sleepy because my son was a newborn, so I didn't get that sleep. My son has graduated, he's a lawyer, and we still haven't decided what to do with this. So I think it's important that leadership also means being able to overcome some of the things that have prevented us from working together. And I'm very hopeful that with Europe, with the European Union, we'll be able to we have a lot of like-minded views on many topics, so how come we are not connected more deeply? This is something that I really believe in. And it's not to the exclusion of the important relations that we have with the Global South, which are fundamental, including in trade. We export our exports to China, for instance, or more than our exports to US and EU combined. So, but anyway, I don't know if I answered, but it's kind of my...
I share your frustration, and that brings us to, we spoke about the importance of consensus and driving consensus forward, but we also, you mentioned the frustration with the consensus rule. So I'll ask you to do the impossible for us. Explain the consensus rule of the COP, because I remember that at the last COP, consensus was reached, and the second after consensus was reached, one nation after the other raised the hand and said, we disagree, which, in my naive, loyally belief of what consensus means, should be impossible after you have just allegedly voted for something. Is consensus at the COP not consensus? Or was this just we went along with the consensus, but there are things that were painful for us, and it was just phrased awkwardly?
Well, where to start? So there is one thing which kind of is the ultimate decision-making tool, and it's a big gavel, it's a hammer. And once this gavel reaches the table or wherever, there is this bang, the decision is made. Whether you agree or not,
So you have to be quick.
you have to be very quick, because once the gavel, once the chairman has gavelled, the decision is being made. If you don't agree, you have to raise your voice before the hammer is down. What happened at last COP? The hammer went down, the country raised the flag afterwards. Or maybe the country raised the flag. We call it flag when you raise your name tag with the country name on it, and the chair hasn't seen it. This is a kind of a common practice. This also happened in Brazil. That's
It happens in Vienna too.
I mean, it's a common practice in those conferences. It's a kind of, if you want to make a decision, you just don't see, you just gavel and the decision is made. And so that's the consensus. Consensus means everyone agrees, even if you don't agree. But if you don't agree, you have to raise your voice. If you don't say anything, although you don't agree, your problem. So you have to say something. Whether, and maybe also to coming back to your question, whether this is kind of a decision-making procedure which is still working, I don't think so. Because it's consensus nowadays, you go down, or you have to, the agreements are minimal compromises. You can't get more ambitious. If this is what the world wants, so be it. But I think you could be more ambitious if you have different forms of getting to an agreement. Yeah.
We need a VAR decision for the flag going up. I noticed
just
that.
maybe one sentence. I think in order to change the consensus position, you need consensus. So we all know that's never going to happen. So unfortunately.
It is across the board. The WTO has the same problem. 120 countries want an investment facilitation agreement. But we need consensus to put it into the rule book as a treaty that not everyone agrees with. So.
But it's interesting because, after the global financial crisis in 2008, the world was able to set up a rescue package that was really unheard of. I mean, $1 trillion US, and that was done through the G20, and that was done on the basis of a consensus. So I think when you have a very dramatic situation, and we have one, we should expect consensus to work, and you can do it through building blocks, perhaps, if you had building blocks. I know the issue is much more complex, but I don't see how you could do it otherwise. I mean, because then people start disengaging, and this is the risk we have. If we start like a voting system, and I don't know. I haven't done actually climate negotiations, so I don't know. I worked at the second committee, and we didn't vote resolutions. We were able to reach. So.
And at this point, I would open it up to questions from the audience. Yes, time to start.
Hello, thank you everyone for the great insights. My name is Maria, I'm from Brazil, and I'm a student in the Mais2 program of the Academy. My question is to Ambassador Saboia. I would like to ask about energy transition, specifically in the case of biofuels. How far and how much do you think Brazil can help other countries in their energy transition as a biofuel supplier, specifically in Europe? Do you see this topic present in the discussions, and what is your view on this? Thank you.
Thank you. Should I answer immediately, or
yes,
do you want to take a round?
Answer immediately and then.
Well, I think Brazil has a tested experience that's been there since the 70s, not for climate change reasons, but for energy security reasons. And it's an option. I think we have to resort to different technologies and biofuels is one of them. We already have a mixture in Brazil. I think almost 30% of the gas is actually ethanol. It's very efficient. They generate their own electricity, and they sell electricity to the grid. Not all countries are able to produce the way we do, and probably the biofuel market will evolve because you have new generations of biofuels. But the fact that you start with with bioenergy, biofuels, gives you a result that allows you to invest in other technologies. So if you have to deliver a reduction in greenhouse gases until a certain in a shorter period, you have to resort to what you have now. There are other technologies, hydrogen and others, that will mature later, but how can you implement your commitments now? So we've been working with different countries. We've been working with India, for instance. They adopted the biofuels too, and also some countries in Southeast Asia are also very, let's say, would be very positive for them. We're working together also with some countries on that issue.
Thank you. I think let's stay in the back because you're already standing there.
Thank you all for coming. My name is Benedict von Bommel. I'm a second-year master student here at the Academy. Thanks of all also to the organizers for organizing this quite interesting talk. I would be interested if you all could expand a bit more about the role of the European Union in the negotiations and also at the COP. Is there talks within the Union? Is there a Union position, or is it more every country for themselves? Yep.
I presume this question goes directly to you.
How much time do I have? That's a bit of a... where do I start? First of all, we call it COPs, the Conference of the Parties, we call it COPs, not COP, sorry. The European Union speaks with one voice. Whoever speaks on behalf of the European Union doesn't speak as Austria or Germany or France, it's the European Union. In order to be able to speak on behalf of the European Union, you can't just raise your hand. I think I'm good for that. It's a long process, and you need to earn the honor because you are an expert on a certain topic or something like that. For the position, that's also a long process because for the COP, we start kind of thinking of the positions after summer. So we have actually 2 weeks in June, which is a preparatory meeting. For the June sessions, we start the preparations in January. So the EU has to agree on a common position, and after the June session, we start the whole procedure for the COP. So it's actually whatever isn't written in, which is called the position paper, the EU doesn't have a position. If something happens which is not in the position paper, you need to discuss, you need to go to EU coordination, and all 27 member states, including the Commission, they have to agree on an EU position, otherwise there is no position. So it's a bit of a difficult thing, but we do coordinate a lot. During COPs, every day in the morning and every day in the evening, the EU coordinates in order to have a common position. So it's a bit of a difficult thing to understand and to follow because we are a complicated bunch of 27 member states. But was this kind of understandable? Yeah.
You delegates are the most tired at the conferences.
Yes, we are.
I think right in the back. Yes.
Thank you very much for the event. My name is Lalu, and I'm the staff of the Permanent Mission of Indonesia in Vienna. I would like to ask a question to Ambassador Saboia and also Ms. Jäger. So considering that this year we haven't been able to acknowledge the participation of the United States in this year's conference. Definitely there's something is going up for next year's conference in Italia. And I would like to ask, what is the steps of mitigation from both Austria as part of the EU and also Brazil as part of the G77 about the possibility of United States would not be attending next year's conferences, considering that also next year that the president of negotiation of the conference is Australia, which is the closest ally of the United States. Thank you very much.
Whoever wants to go first.
Now your turn.
I mean, as I said, I think we all agree that it's important to have the US on board. I mean, and it's not our fault that they're not on board. I mean, we've come an extra mile to have them be part of this process. They have their own internal discussions. I mean, I lived twice in the US, and it's a very dynamic society where people express different views in a very passionate manner. So I think, the US was present in a way, and they have, and they will continue to be invited, but also there will continue to be a push and a discussion I think so, in the US. So that's, hopefully at some point they will come back, and but in the meantime we have to keep mobilized and try to do what we can together. I mean, it's not rocket science what I'm saying, and pretty obvious, but it's what I understand should be done.
Would you like to add anything?
Maybe just once, and fully concur with what the ambassador just said. The doors are open and they are invited back to the process. I just have doubts that this is going to happen under current administration. I might also have doubts whether a next administration is going to kind of change its opinion. We all hope, but they are very welcome back at the table. But maybe just one sentence, because they are not part of the process, doesn't mean the US is not doing anything. For example, the governor of California was there, it's Gavin Newsom. So he was surrounded by millions, I mean, it's exaggeration, but by thousands of people when he just crossed the corridor somewhere. So there is a lot going on in the US, be it from federal states or be it from different organizations. So there is progress there, and they're doing absolutely everything in order to kind of deliver on their promises. There's also Bloomberg trying to capture or kind of help with climate finance, what the US is not paying anymore. So there is a lot of things going on. So just a little bit to kind of say that the US is not doing anything anymore, that's just not true.
May I just add something? In the end, the problem will not be solved at the COPs, but at what is happening in the individual countries. So I think just staring at this snake of the United States, maybe it's not so wrong, the snake, but not just staring at that is maybe not so important. It's maybe more important to make sure that something's happening in your own country,
yes,
and that things are progressing here. And there's things which are helping us, and that's, for instance, economics. I mean, renewable energies are much cheaper than other energies, and there's more going forward than we generally know from statistics, because in solar energy, for instance, the statistics only reference what is going through the meters. Anything which is going directly from the sun to you, or whatever it is, laptop or refrigerator or whatever, is not part of the international statistics. So we're much farther on in solar energy than statistics show, and there's a lot happening. And I think there is a dynamic here which will not carry us all the way, because we also need changes in agriculture, for instance, but it will carry us quite a bit, and I think we shouldn't forget that. And COPs, I'm not saying they're not important; they're important. But what really matters is what is being done in the individual countries, and I think that is where, if we can't expect big leaps from the COPs, then we must make sure that we've got the leaps at home.
Thank you. That was really important and also optimistic. Here in front.
It was optimistic.
I always take issue with the word optimistic. That sort of is, everything will be okay.
It wasn't that, but it was at least
might be okay if we do something about it. We have to do something. Yeah. Just hoping things will turn out right is too little.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm a retired Austrian diplomat, and a question that has, really been on the forefront is what impact has the demographic explosion in the South on environment? We hear in the Amazon rainforest, a lot is cut down in order to leave room for soya or for cattle farms. In Indonesia and Malaysia, it's for oil palm trees. And that is worrying, of course. I think it has a severe impact on global climate. But we are closing in, I think, 9 billion to almost 10 billion people. Has science seen, or are there any studies on this issue?
Sure, that's one of the main input parameters in all the models, development of the world population, because it depends on where the population grows and what kind of style of living they have, and it's the middle class, the growing middle class, that is one of the big problems. On the other hand, the UN has consistently revised its demographic projections. And if I understand correctly, but I haven't really gone into this more deeply, in most part of the world, fertility rates are going down. So I think that doesn't mean that population is not a problem, and there's still several, or at least one decade or so with growth. But the more important thing is what will these people need to live a fulfilled life? And I think that is where we haven't really got a good answer. And one of the problems I see is that this issue is generally raised in the industrialized nations, looking at the population development in developing nations. And the developing nations rightly say, but it's your lifestyle that is causing the problem. Yeah. And I think we have to look at both. And if what we as industrial nation can do is change our lifestyle. We cannot dictate population growth in the third world. So I think it's an issue, and in all the scientific models, and if you look at even limits to growth, 1972. The scenarios that lead to a stabilization or sustainability, if you want to call it that, they all include population growth stopping. So you cannot have a sustainable world with continuous growth of population. So it is an issue, but we have to be rather sensitive about who addresses it and how.
Thank you. And I think one last question here in front, and then I'm very sorry.
I'd just like to add something.
Of course, please.
To that. I think Brazil is very concerned with illegal deforestation. We have strong legislation, and we have managed to reduce rate of deforestation. And our agriculture is mainly not in the Amazon. So it's not, most of our soy production is not on the Amazon. And most of what we do is sustainable. I mean, we've been increasing our production without, for instance, in sugar and ethanol. We've increased manyfold production without increasing the land, the share of land. And we are one of the countries with the most reduced share of the territory. About population in the We we are not doing things for the sake of nature. We're doing things for the sake of people. It should be people-centered. We don't want the Amazon to be, it's not a place for people just to see pictures. There are people who actually live there and they have a say. And they are probably more sustainable than in other parts of Brazil and in other parts of the world. And we are also an aging society. Brazil is aging very quickly, and other developing countries are also going through that transition. So overpopulation will not be actually an issue in most of the countries, and that was an issue in the Stockholm conference, and actually developing countries were against that approach, neo-Malthusian approach, and fortunately the following conference was refocused the issue on development and environment. But I think we are also concerned with deforestation, illegal deforestation. That's why in Vienna we propose to have a protocol on the Convention on Transnational Organized Crime, which is on crimes that affect the environment. Because a lot of what we see in environmental degradation also, unfortunately, has to do with organized crime, increasingly. And so if we don't collaborate internationally, we may have the best legislation in the country and the best efforts, but we will not be able to counter organized crime in those areas. Thank you.
Thank you. So one last question. I'm very sorry I have to close the list after that. I also have the papers for the students here. I realize now I should have given them to you earlier.
Your Excellency, distinguished speakers, thank you very much for your valuable insights. My name is Katrin Spielvogel. I'm also a student here at the Diplomatic Academy. My question would be that the COP faces increasingly negative backlash at the countries back at home. And here is my question: if the negotiations there reflect on how to maintain a democratic legitimacy for all the climate actions that are taken and all the policies, especially in the times of rising populism which we are having currently. Thank you.
I think that's a question to everyone, and
I
always
talk too much.
leads to a lot of consultations, I fear.
Well,
who wants to start?
I'll start. I'll give it a go. I think I do know where you're coming from, because it's difficult to kind of understand back home what is actually happening. But what happens at the COP doesn't directly translate into you as a citizen of a country. It needs to go through different procedures. So, for example, if there is an agreement at the COP, it needs to, first of all, if there needs to be a translation, then it needs to be translated into EU law. And then for example, all EU member states would have to agree to EU law. And then as a next step, it would need to be translated into Austrian law. So this is a kind of, just from a legal perspective, it takes a bit of time in order to kind of reach you as a citizen on the ground. How you can translate different policies for people on the ground directly, and what the implications of a certain agreement is for a single person, that's a different story. That's a very difficult exercise, because I sometimes have the issue that in my nerdy brain of being part of the negotiating items, for me something is very clear, and then when talking to people, I see the eyes getting bigger and bigger, and I said, okay, this is way too complicated. But I always say that that's the mandate or the task of politicians, to translate the outcomes of COPs to their national level back home. That's the job of journalists, to translate messages to people back home.
Well, maybe we are attaching too much importance in public awareness to the COPs. I think the COPs are important for politicians and for the policies of the countries, but I'm not so sure that's a good idea to be talking for 2 weeks only about the COPs with nobody understanding the discussions. I mean, people say, well, they're fighting over words, whether it's a mechanism or it's not a mechanism, and nobody has an idea what does it mean, whether it's a mechanism or it's not a mechanism. And this sort of gives the impression of total failure. And I think there's so many other areas of politics where similarly complicated discussions are taking place and nobody talks about them. They talk about, in the end, what have we achieved, and they don't talk so much about what did we achieve. So maybe I'm a bit divided on this, because on the other hand, I'm very happy that climate is an issue in news, at least for 2 weeks a year. But maybe it's the wrong type of issue that we're talking about. Maybe because it's become so theoretical and so far from what affects the individual. Maybe that would be a reason to reduce the information and the hype about COP, maybe we could achieve more if there was not such a spotlight on it, and rather focus on other things and maybe on results. I'm not sure, but I have the impression that people are getting tired of COPs that don't produce results. And they're even questioning whether Paris was a result. That's bad. That's bad if we're starting to question whether that was a positive result. Because they say, well, we've got these 1.5 degrees, but we're not achieving them, so what was the good of it? So maybe we're emphasizing the wrong thing.
Can I just respond to that? Because I think this brings me back to what I said at the very beginning, because everyone is aware of the one single thing which happened at the COP or which didn't happen at the COP because the fossil fuels. And what I tried to say is so much more has happened there, which were actually good things, which kind of helped to progress the whole process. I know it's difficult, but then it's also those things which politicians don't pick up. No one explains to people. So I know that's a bit of a different story, but I wouldn't agree to kind of not have the spotlight for 2 weeks at the COP, because if you don't have, out of 52 weeks a year, for 2 weeks, a spot on climate change, when would you have that? I think the awareness, the attention would just simply not happen. And with all the good and the bad stuff of the process, whether it's delivering or not delivering, I think the topic needs those 2 weeks of spotlight.
I think the topic needs the 2 weeks, but maybe we could find another way of focusing for 2 weeks, a way that looks more successful, we are moving forward. We could celebrate the achievements that we have, sort of a conference of achievements, something like that. I don't know. It's a question. I don't know, but I do share the concern.
I think I agree with you. I agree that it's not, but the COP is not that important that people are. This is the center. I think it's not also about explaining. It's also about listening. Yeah. I think sometimes you get in those bubbles. You stay in those bubbles, and not just climate, on other issues, and you forget. You lose your ability to reflect, which requires also to think. To listen to these different views and to engage, let's say, in a respectful way. Now we see lots of bubbles and people who don't want to sit next to another because this person is this or that. So I think this is something I see in my own country, and I don't know how to address this, but I think we have to. It's more than just climate change. It's about changing a life, not just a lifestyle. I'm going to use a bicycle. It's about a mindset of, I will. For me, relations with other people are more important than just, being the richest or the most powerful. So that thing it's a society that has a disease, and that is what has to be addressed. But I don't know how, so I'm just a Brazilian ambassador here in Austria.
This ties nicely into, and that is why in ETIA we have to address all of these different areas, because, as you rightly said, it all is tied together in some way, shape, or form. Thank you all very, very much for coming. Thank you in particular to the panelists. Thank you. And for the students, I have something here, and I think for the panelists, we also have something.